Welcome, late night friends. Get ready for another dark night at the dark unknown. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and feel the presence of the most disturbing neighbors you'd ever want. If you enjoy chilling true stories, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any late night horrors. The neighbor on the stairs. I was 23 years old and had lived in the same apartment complex since I was a child. It was a typical place, full of families who had known each other for years, children running around the courtyard, neighbors greeting each other in the elevator. I always felt safe there, until he arrived. It all started when the brothers in apartment 103 welcomed a relative, a young man my age, with a strange appearance and even more disturbing behavior. He never spoke to anyone, always wore the hood of his sweatshirt over his face, and seemed to shy away from any human contact. But I soon realized something was wrong. In the first few weeks, he started sitting on the stairs leading up to my apartment, on the second floor. The thing is, he lived on the ground floor. There was no reason for him to be there. Whenever I came home from college late at night, there he was. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for something, or someone. At first, I tried to ignore it. I thought it was a coincidence, maybe he just wanted to be alone. But over time, I realized it was always the same pattern. When I arrived home, he'd show up. When I went out with my dog, he'd be nearby. I even mentioned it to my parents and my boyfriend, but they thought it was just paranoia. Until one night, my boyfriend dropped me off at the building's gate and walked me up to the apartment door. The stranger was, as always, on the stairs. When he saw I was with someone, he got up and quickly ran down, almost running away. From that day on, I decided my boyfriend would always walk me home. I thought this would have solved the problem, but it was the opposite. The neighbors started showing up in other places. Often, when I got off the bus coming back from college, he was already at the stop, waiting for me. Other times, he'd appear behind me as I walked through the complex. It was as if he knew my schedule, as if he were studying my every move. The situation became unbearable when my mother found him peering through the kitchen window. She had gotten up early in the morning to get a drink of water and noticed something strange outside. A large tree was right next to the window, and in the darkness, a figure was moving among the branches. As she approached, she saw it clearly. It was him. Sitting on a branch, motionless, staring intently into our apartment. Frightened, my mother called my father, but the neighbor immediately jumped out of the tree and ran inside. We decided to call the police. When the officers arrived and examined the tree, they found something that shocked me. Among the branches were empty snack packages and even a blanket. He had been using that tree as a hiding place for days, maybe weeks. While we lived our lives, he was there, observing every detail. After that, the tension at home became unbearable. I couldn't sleep. I had the constant feeling of being watched. I began to avoid going out alone, locking doors and windows repeatedly before going to bed. The entire apartment complex was on alert. But then, out of nowhere, he disappeared. It's been a little over 6 months since there's been any sign of him. His father still lives in the same apartment, but when asked, he just shakes his head and closes the door. The police never managed to find enough evidence to do anything beyond filing a report. To this day, no one knows where he went. Sometimes, as I pass the building's stairs, I feel my heart race as if he were still there, motionless, waiting. Other times, when I look out the kitchen window, I can't help but imagine that perhaps he's still hiding, watching silently, as he always has. The most disturbing thing of all is that there's no end. He simply vanished. And the uncertainty haunts me. Is he gone forever? Or is he still here, just waiting for the right moment to return? The light in the window. I was only 16 when this happened. I lived with my mother in a small, simple but cozy house. My bedroom was next to the dining room, right near the back door. It was nothing special, except for one detail. Where there should have been an air conditioner, there was only thin plywood covering the space. If someone wanted to, they could just lift the board and have a direct view of my room. The first few times I noticed something strange, I didn't pay any attention. At 3 in the morning, a light would shine through the window, as if someone were shining a flashlight inside. I told my mother and the maid, but they both laughed and said it must have been the neighbor watching his chickens. But that never convinced me. What kind of person inspects chickens every day at 3 in the morning? As the nights went by, the situation worsened. I was constantly on alert, listening for every sound coming from the yard. One time, while I was ironing in the yard, I looked over and saw my neighbor standing there, watching me intently from the other side of the fence. He didn't say a word, just stared. I was so nervous that I ran into the house and locked all the doors until my mother arrived. Days later, I finally had confirmation that my fears weren't just imagination. It was the middle of the night, and I was lying in bed, watching videos on my phone with my headphones on. Suddenly, I heard a very subtle sound, wood moving. I took off my headphones and lay still, my heart racing. Then, I saw a scene that chilled me to the bone. The board covering the air conditioning vent was slowly lifted. A hand appeared in the darkness, holding a flashlight, and the beam of light invaded my room, illuminating every corner. I froze. I couldn't believe my eyes. I summoned my courage and screamed as loud as I could. Reflexively, I grabbed my phone and pointed the flashlight at the vent, trying to see who was there. The person backed away quickly, knocking the wood back down and fleeing across the yard. Silence returned, but I was still trembling. I grabbed a large knife from the kitchen and went to the back door, unsure if it was courage or pure desperation. When I looked outside, I saw the neighbor. He was there, walking calmly with a flashlight in his hand, pretending to examine the chicken coop. But there was something in his gaze when he saw me, a restrained, cold smile, that made me understand it wasn't the first time. How many nights had he watched me without me noticing? How many times had he hidden in the darkness, waiting for me to be vulnerable? The next morning, I told my mother everything. She tried to calm me down, saying it might just be a coincidence, but I knew. That light, those silent visits at the window, weren't a figment of my imagination. Since that night, I've never been able to sleep the same way again. I started locking doors, reinforcing windows, and always leaving a heavy object near my bed. The fear wasn't just of being watched, but of what might happen when I finally fell asleep and had no way to react. The neighbor was never confronted directly. He continued his normal life, always with that indifferent expression. And I carried on with the terrible certainty that he was still lurking, waiting for an opportunity. To this day, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I feel the need to check every window, every dark corner of the room. Because I know that night wasn't the first time he'd been there. Just the first time I noticed him. The cat killer. In that quiet neighborhood, where everyone knew and greeted each other on the street, a silent shadow began to spread. It wasn't robberies, nor fights, but something even more disturbing. Cats. Cats that once ran free in the yards, playing on the rooftops, and meowing in the early hours of the morning, began disappearing without explanation. At first, no one worried. Perhaps one had gotten lost or been run over on a nearby road. But soon, animals began to be found. Some were dead, with marks of heavy blows to the head. Others simply wouldn't return home. Families, outraged and frightened, began to whisper among themselves. And almost always, the same person's name was mentioned, the neighbor on the corner. A lonely, bitter man who spent his days drinking on the porch and his nights prowling the yards. He had already demonstrated his hatred for animals. More than once, he shouted for all to hear. "Those damn cats won't let me sleep. I'll wipe them all out." The threats echoed like a warning, but no one thought he'd be capable of carrying them out. It was on Christmas Eve that the horror reached its peak. As the houses filled with lights and laughter, a family found something that would forever stain the memory of that holiday. In the garden, right in front of the front door, lay a black plastic bag. Inside, mingled in cruel silence, were the family's cats, dead, bloodied, as if someone had made a point of leaving that message. The teenage daughter's scream echoed through the block. The neighbors ran, but nothing could be done. The bag lay there, heavy, betraying the cruelty of whoever had placed it there. Everyone knew who the culprit was. The aggressive drunk, the same one who spent his nights wandering through backyards and who, days before, had been seen carrying bags and tools out of his garage. The same one who laughed to himself, shaking his bottle, when asked about the cats. The police were called. They collected the bag, listened to the residents' accounts, and questioned the suspect. But there was insufficient evidence. No witnesses had seen him commit the act. No cameras had recorded it. And he, in his hoarse voice, simply said, "Prove it was me. You have nothing." And indeed, they didn't. The case was closed. Families began to lock their houses more tightly, bringing their cats inside at night, something they never did before. The children didn't feel safe, knowing the man still prowled the neighborhood, free, with that dark look that seemed to carry an unspoken promise. Over time, the meowing subsided. The few cats that survived began to live hidden, frightened, as if they, too, knew they were being hunted. And the neighbor? He remained there, sitting on the porch, watching, drinking, sometimes smiling strangely when someone hurried past. No one was ever able to prove he was the cat killer. But everyone believed. And deep down, a question still haunts those families to this day. If he was capable of doing that to defenseless creatures, what else would he be capable of doing? The man on the 4th floor. The building was old, with narrow hallways and walls that held secrets. The neighbors knew each other only by sight, exchanging hurried greetings in the elevator or while collecting the mail. But there was one resident who caught everyone's attention, a middle-aged man, always accompanied by his elderly mother. He seemed ordinary, until someone noticed his eyes. Eyes that never blinked when they found someone's face, eyes that fixed with disturbing intensity, as if searching for something hidden within a person's soul. And to a young woman living on the 4th floor, those eyes seemed to haunt her. In the elevator, he always stood still, motionless, staring. In the hall, when she passed, he smiled strangely, without saying a word. And at night, when she arrived home, she had the feeling someone was watching her through the peephole. One night, she heard a loud knock on her door. When she looked through the peephole, she saw the man standing there, alone, breathing deeply. Before she could ask him anything, he said firmly, "My girlfriend's in there." "I know she is." The young woman's heart raced. She lived alone. There was no one in the apartment but her. Afraid, she asked him to leave. He insisted, repeating the phrase, as if he truly believed it. Desperate, she called a neighbor, who came down and kicked him out of the hallway. That night, she could barely sleep. If it had been just an isolated incident, it might have been forgotten. But the man returned. The next night, she heard shuffling footsteps in front of the door, followed by muffled laughter. The doorbell rang, constantly, as if someone had their finger glued to the button. When she peeked through the peephole, he was there, laughing. Sometimes he pressed his face so close that his huge eyes filled the entire lens, as if he knew she was watching him. Other times, he tried to turn the doorknob, forcing his way in, mumbling incomprehensible things. The young woman called the police several times. The officers came, asked questions, but nothing happened. The man always claimed he was just looking for his girlfriend. There was no evidence of a break-in. And, with no serious crime on record, he remained free. Days passed, and the situation worsened. He began showing up at random times, early in the morning, mid-afternoon, even in the morning. The pattern was always the same: loud knocks, muffled laughter, the same accusation that his girlfriend was hiding in her apartment. The fear grew so great that the young woman began sleeping on the couch, with a kitchen knife by her side. The doorbell echoed even when it wasn't ringing. It was as if her mind had been taken over by the sound, the laughter, the constant presence behind the door. And there was another detail that tormented her. Often, when the man appeared, his mother would be nearby, at the end of the hallway, motionless, just watching. She never said anything. She just watched, as if she were complicit in everything. One morning, the knocking was so loud it seemed like the door was about to break down. The young woman, desperate, called all the neighbors. Some went down to the hallway and found him there, pounding on the wood and shouting, "Give me back my girlfriend. She's there." The police were called again, and this time they took him away. But a few hours later, he was back, sitting on the stairs of the building, laughing to himself, as if nothing had happened. The building panicked. The young woman considered moving, but her finances wouldn't allow it. She locked herself inside, reinforced the door, and placed furniture against the entrance. But even today, anyone who passes by the fourth floor claims to hear, in the middle of the night, the sound of the doorbell ringing by itself, followed by a muffled laugh, echoing down the hallway. And everyone knows what that means. He never gave up. The backyard ritual. It was an ordinary night in rural Texas. Silence reigned in the small town, broken only by the sound of crickets and the wind swaying the trees. Inside the house, a 10-year-old child woke in the middle of the night, unsure of why. Something made her walk to the bedroom window. What she saw there, in the neighbor's yard, never left her mind. 6 men, all dressed in white, formed a perfect circle. In the center, a flaming cross illuminated their hooded faces. They chanted strange chants in a language the child didn't recognize. The fire cast long shadows across the lawn, and their eyes seemed to glow in the light of the flames. The child shivered. She didn't know whether to scream, wake her parents, or simply hide. But she stood there, paralyzed, watching. And for a moment, she had the impression that one of the figures was staring at her through the window. The next morning, he told his parents. They didn't believe him right away, but the smell of smoke in the air and the burn marks on the neighboring lawn confirmed his story. The frightened family contacted the town sheriff. But the answer was short, cold, and terrifying. "You'd better forget about this. There's nothing I can do." His silence spoke louder than his words. It was as if he already knew who those men were, but was afraid to act. That night, the child tried to sleep early, but the chants still echoed in his mind. The crackle of burning would seem alive inside the room. Every shadow cast by the trees outside seemed like a still, watching figure. 2 days later, his mother found something strange on the doorstep. An aged envelope with yellowed paper inside. The message was written in Latin, but in firm, frighteningly clear letters. "We are watching you. Always." His mother hid the letter from her son, but he overheard his parents' muffled conversation in the kitchen. Fear spread like poison through the house. They began to lock all the doors and windows, avoid going out at night, and turn off the lights early. But nothing changed the fact that, right next door, there was a yard where something dark was happening. A few days passed in silence, until, once again, in the middle of the night, the child woke. An instinct made her look out the window again. The circle was there. This time, there were more people, 8, maybe 9, dressed in white, always surrounding the flaming cross. But there was something worse. They weren't just performing the ritual. One of them raised his head and, through the darkness, pointed straight at the window. It was impossible to deny. They knew they were being watched. The child threw himself on the bed, covering his face with the blanket, his heart racing. Every crackle of the fire, every breath of wind, sounded like footsteps approaching the front door. As the weeks passed, the rituals lessened, but never ceased completely. Sometimes distant chants could be heard, other times it was just the smell of smoke that filled the air. The family never felt safe again. The child grew up, but never forgot. Even today, when he talks about the past, he tells the same story. They were there, dressed in white, and they knew I saw them. The sheriff never mentioned it. The neighbors pretended not to hear anything. In the yard, to this day, bears dark marks on the ground, like scars that never faded. But the scariest detail wasn't the fire, nor the chants, nor the burning cross. It was the certainty that someone, or something, was truly watching, always. And for that child, true terror was never in books or movies. He lived right next door, lit by the flames of a cross. And so we come to the end of this night, friends of the early morning. If any of these stories made you look out the window, or distrust your own neighbors, then remember, fear lives next door. Thank you for watching this far. If you enjoyed it, please like it, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so we can meet again on the next dark night. Until then, keep your doors shut.